Ian Bardwell, thanks for coming on. It's great to meet you, man. And I might kind of put you on the spot because I don't know that much about you. I know we've received an email from you, very kind email, by the way. Thank you. And Joe said, "Hey, what do you think about having this guy on?" I was like, "Yeah, shoot, yeah. We're always looking for fresh game, you know." And so I read a little bit about what you did. And then in the busyness of life, some of the details have faded from my memory. So anyhow, could you tell us a little bit about where you are right now and little brief description on what you do, what a day in the life of Ian Bardwell looks like, and kind of who you work for? I think you can summarize that into a little capsule so that folks know who we're talking to and what you do and what part of the country you hail from.
You bet. I'm the Wilderness and Trails Manager on the east side of the Bob Marshall Scapegoat Wilderness in central Montana. Our office is here in Choteau, Montana. So what we do is we do the infrastructure and recreation management in the backcountry for the USDA Forest Service. And I run a crew of usually in the summer, we've got anywhere from 15 to 20 people. And then we have about 65 head of horses and mules that we use just to facilitate our work in the backcountry. So, I mean, they're the commuting vehicle for us to get our tools and food and camp gear and everything back into the woods. And our crews go out for 10 days at a time and then come back in for 4 days off. Is the schedule we keep from pretty much early June through about mid to late October. And then we change up our schedule a little bit, do some hunter patrols, start closing up. We've got some remote cabins that were built in the 1930s back in the wilderness that we still use and maintain. And the wilderness that is congressionally designated back in '64, and it's non-motorized, and there's no... That goes for chainsaws too. So all the trail clearing that we do, we use crosscuts and axes as well. And we maintain some bridges and about 1,000 miles of trail on this unit.
Wow. That's I'm sure we'll get much deeper into it, but it's funny because that's BLM land, right?
USDA Forest Service.
So that's Forest Service. So is that under an entirely different section of the government, or is it just like a higher level of conservation?
No, it's Department of Agriculture is the Forest Service land, whereas the BLM land that you mentioned, that's Department of Interior. So just different agencies in the federal government.
Yeah, so it's interesting. So they're nitpicky all the way down to not even bringing a chainsaw in. What's the reasoning behind that?
You know, there's a Wilderness Act that was written in 1964 by some fellas that were kind of looking around and just seeing how quick the West was getting gobbled up and developed, and thought, you know, we probably ought to put a pin in this in a few of these wild places left. And they got Congress to act on it, and the president signed off, and that created a whole bunch of wilderness areas around the U.S. And some there not too far from you guys as well. I think almost every state in the union has a wilderness area. But anyhow, they tried to take a snapshot in time from before all the motorized development and stuff was happening and say, like, this is how we're going to manage this area for historic purposes, and also to just maintain some of these more primitive skill sets.
Yeah, I imagine that gives some job security to a guy that's using mules to pack his gear around.
We don't get anywhere past about 3 miles an hour, so we spend a lot of time traveling from work sites.
Boy, that's got to be a nice work environment.
Yeah.
Man.
So, right off the bat, and again, you'll kind of see that we don't have a ton of rhyme or reason to these conversations. But I guess the first question I have with that crew you're managing, are you the one hiring on that crew, or is that made somewhere above you, those decisions, or how is that done?
Well, a little bit of both. So we have some human resources staff that are national, and they put the advertisements out in the fall, and folks from around the country apply to them, and then I get sent a list in the winter, December ish, and then I start making phone calls, me and my other permanent staff, and we start sorting out who wants to work here and who we think would be a good fit. We get quite a few returning folks, and this would be a plug too for folks listening out there. I mean, it seems like we add 3 to 5 new people every year to the crew. Folks that want to be in the woods and that want to learn something about using horses and mules in the backcountry. It used to be that when I started, I've been here since 2002, and I started on a crew in '96. There was a lot of stock or backcountry skills that was just inherent to the folks on the applicant list. And that's changed certainly in the last decade or so, where we tend to look for people that are just enthusiastic about wanting to be here and learn, because there just isn't on the supply side the folks coming with stock skills or, that woodscraft that you would have seen even, 15 or 20 years ago.
Yeah.
And I think that's true in, all sectors of the backcountry work. I talk to a lot of the outfitters here too, and they find the same thing. We're kind of all casting about for the same individuals.
Yeah. So if you had to pick, and feel free to answer this as honestly as possible. I'm not like fishing for an answer here. I'm genuinely interested. If you say you had someone who was really handy and maybe did have backcountry experience and just hadn't been around stock a whole bunch, would you maybe pick that person, or maybe someone has been around a lot of stock, but it's in kind of a different environment? Maybe they don't know how to, these like woodsmanship skills you're referring to. If you had to teach one or the other, is one more difficult? I'm sure both can be learned, but I'm curious about that.
What I like to say about summer help is summer help and summer not. So the first thing, you get a lot of that feel from the interviews and doing some reference checks. We've had people show up here and succeed from both of those scenarios that you laid out. Somebody that would maybe I think we did some high school rodeo in Oklahoma and somehow got their name in our applicant's hat, and and they've come up and been good. And the thing to remember though for a lot of us, our work though is we're just using the horses and mules as our commuter vehicle to get to the work site, and then the work starts. Then we're either cutting trees or reconstructing bridges or putting in a new tread or cleaning campsites. All that sort of stuff is the day-to-day work. So some of that goes back to like who of those two candidates has the better work ethic.
Yeah.
Are you seeing many of these people come back year after year, or is this more of a after high school, during college in the summer kind of job for the most part?
Both. We have some folks that have been here 15 seasons, some that have been here 5 seasons, and then a handful that this is their first year. And that makes for really good dichotomy for the crew. And to have that in the field type mentorship happening just amongst the crew with that different levels of experience. So frame that up again for me real quick, Ben. I kind of lost my train of thought on that one.
Oh, yeah. So just the turnover rate. If people are, doing this as a career and coming back year after year, or if it's constantly passed through and you're having to retrain year after year, new recruits coming in.
And so both of those, we do get some turnover. What we do use that makes this district a little more unique is because of our country on the east side of the divide creates a bit of a rain shadow. So we have some pretty broad valleys in the wilderness that provide a lot of opportunity for camping with stock. Because of that rain shadow event, we've got more grass than timber in a lot of stuff. And so when And also, as we've had more wildfires in the last 40 years, a lot of that fire area, once it's been burned twice, comes back as grass. So given that, we have good stock camping opportunities. We send our crews out self-supported with stock. So a 2 or 3 person crew will get anywhere from 5 to 7 head of stock. People get a saddle horse and a couple pack mules and go out for 10 days. It's not, in a lot of other units, because of the shortage of feed, a packer packs them to their campsite and drops them and their gear off. And then they're hoofing it from there out. Here we get to give them stock that they keep with them. And as you guys know, that creates a certain bond. And a lot of our crews get quite a bit of loyalty to those animals, and that keeps them wanting to come back year after year just to create that opportunity.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Oh, that sounds awesome. Like if I ever got into that line of work, I'd want to have it to, you keep the critters around. I feel like that'd be a lot more, I don't know, just like an energy boost almost.
Well, it is that and when you get to the work site, because you didn't hike there and carry all your gear, you've got energy left to do stuff.
Yeah. Heck yeah.
Yeah.
So, and as our crews get better and our people are becoming more skilled, they keep, they'll come to me and say like, hey, can I add on an extra mule? Because I want to take, these extra tools with me to do a little bit more work or a little broader scope of work in the backcountry. And so, if we spend all the time to get somebody to the site in these remote areas that take a couple of days of riding to get to, being better prepared is awesome. I mean, that's that preparation that talk about with kind of that Ray Hunt horsemanship is, and you can apply it to all sorts of different facets of life.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely. So, Ian, what's the scope of some of these projects you guys are doing out there in the backcountry? Can you give us a couple of examples of like things you would be building or maintaining or just working on out there?
So there's to facilitate the flow of traffic through the wilderness, in the 60s, they built some suspension bridges that you can ride a horse across. If you guys think of a miniature version of the Brooklyn Bridge, that's a suspension bridge.
Yeah.
And so they move quite a bit when you get a string of horses and mules on them. But anyhow, they're a structure that requires maintenance, and they're about 50 to 60 years old. So we're constantly replacing, whether it's tower parts or stiffening trusses or deck on them. And so it takes a lot of mules to get all that lumber on site and then facilitate the crew and the camp to get that work done. One of the things we did last year that I hadn't done in a while was repairing the stiffening truss on one of those small suspension bridges. And I had taken an engineer in, and we had some shattered members on the upstream side. I suppose the trees come down during high water and must have hit it. But we needed 17-foot pieces of lumber because more joints creates more movement in the bridge. And so to get those 17-foot pieces back there, we did some tandem packing. So basically you put the front of the lumber on the front mule, and then you get them lined up, and then you put the back piece of lumber on the back mule. And we had to go about 15 miles through a little bit of varied rolling terrain. And when I had done that before, quite a while ago, but I got the stuff to where it needed to go, but I didn't feel like it was really a success. And this time we changed up a little bit on our attachment points on our saddles, kind of went through the mule herd on who we thought would tolerate that the best, and figured out, how to do it to the point where we were able to move. I don't remember how many of them 17-footers. We did several laps up to the bridge, and moved all those 17-footers up there that way. We had some minor wrecks, but there was very little blood drawn over the whole thing.
Man.
And just kind of figured out, how to move through some of the corners or the changes in grade without causing undue stress on the mules, and made a spot that those mules could find that relief from the torque in the saddle. And it was pretty interesting how quickly they got in step with each other. And you could guide them with your saddle horse down the trail in a manner that just kind of kept that rhythm going.
Wow. Joe, are you kind of doing the same mental gymnastics that I'm doing? Trying to picture
Yeah.
tandem packing. So are you taking, like, if you've got two 17-foot pieces of lumber, do you hang one on either side so they're sandwiched in the middle? I guess if you did that, essentially, if you needed a extra weight-bearing animal, you could put like another mule. Can you do like 3 or 4 if you had to?
I'm sure you could. You know, the tandem packing, as long as you didn't run up against the weight issue, there's no reason you couldn't do probably up to about 25 footers with 2 mules. I think we were doing 4 17-foot treated 2x6s per side. And so you could cut that down to 1 or 2 members and get them longer if you wanted to. When they took the cables in for those suspension bridges, they would put a loop on a mule and then go to their next mule and put another loop on it. And this would have been, those would have been pushing 100 years ago when some of those cables went in there.
But that would have been a shit pile of cable, wouldn't it? To build one of those things.
But they're taking cable in that's almost 3 inches in diameter. I don't know what the weight per foot is on it, but you couldn't. You'd need a lot of mules.
Wow. That's what I'm saying.
Yeah,
that's a lot of weight.
Yeah. Yep.
Was any of this stuff? Yeah. Was any of this stuff built with equipment or choppered in before? Like they put a mandate in place about equipment not being able to be used?
This specific bridge, I think, is the 3rd one on site. And I think there was one built in the 40s, and that would have been all primitive tools. And then it washed out in the same year that the Wilderness Act was signed, and I think they hustled up and helicoptered in there the bridge members that we're now replacing by packing stuff in.
Wow. Yeah, Joe and I were talking about this not too long ago. I went up and visited him, and we went for a hike. Remember that, Joe? We were hiking up that, whatever that was, the little in Appalachia. Where we were.
Up to the waterfall.
We were looking at we were looking at that. They built this trail, and even if they were allowed to bring equipment in there, it was phenomenal. The amount of concrete that they had up there. Whew. It's crazy.
Yeah.
So I didn't know.
Well, and the rocks they moved.
Yeah. Yeah, it's just it's mind-blowing. So is there ever a time, Ian, where they allow a helicopter to be used in an emergency kind of event?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, there is all sorts of emergency evacuations as people, end up in a state of need. That's never really questioned. And there is a process to request motorized exemptions. But some of it's a bit of a point of pride too, for trying to figure out how to get it done with the horses and mules.
Yeah, I can imagine. I'm sure.
And if you put those two, like sitting there writing exemption paperwork and analysis, or figuring out how to get it there on a horse and mule, that's the one I'm doing.
Yeah,
I bet it's easier.
Yeah.
That makes a lot of sense.
That's great. Wow.
So there's some other stuff, and we ended up, like you said, they're concrete. We packed, mortar to redo some of those historic building foundations and stone and mortar, and we packed gravel for turnpikes. Where there's a boggy section, and we can't move the trail around it. We'll lay down some logs, filter cloth, and then start running the mules packing gravel. And where they're just bags that the bottoms fall out of, they're just folded up. We pull into the pit site, and the crew dumps the buckets of gravel in there. We try not to pull more than 5 or 6 at a time doing that. And then you pull out and you get to the work site, and there's another couple of folks there, and they pull the strings, and the gravel dumps out the bottom at the mule's feet. And we'll do a few laps, or as many necessary.
Oh, heck yeah.
Wow. No, I'm happy they don't let you bring tools up there. I think, boy, if every young man and woman in America could go spend a summer working for you guys, that would give you such a perspective on work ethic and what goes into just building something with your hands and not having a machine do it for you or have someone swoop in and save the day, but like sit down, and if you've got to get your pen and pen and paper out and draw out a plan. And then, like you said, thinking about things like packing tandem with mules, kind of reminds me of how I grew up. Like my dad wouldn't even let me use a power saw till I had mastered the hand saw. And of course I hated that as a kid, but looking back, that's the best thing on earth. Because it saves your fingers, it saves all kinds of things. And then later on as an adult, it saves time even, because you remember what it was like to cut with a handsaw. But just what you're describing, it reminds me of that movie. Did you ever see that movie with Sam Elliott called the Ranger, the Cook, and the Hole in the Sky? Is that at all accurate or somewhat close to what you guys do?
Very similar. I assume the only person that would enjoy watching that movie was somebody like me that was doing the same work. But yeah,
that's a great
movie. They nailed it.
Great.
Yeah.
Have you seen that one, Joe?
That's awesome. So, no, I've never seen that, so I guess I'll have to add it to the list. I'm looking at the cast right now. It actually has quite a lot of
the book's quite a bit better. It's the second story, and the river runs through it.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I've read A River Runs Through It, so okay, I'll have to check that out. So with this one, it sounds like you're like one part wrangler and then one part civil engineer almost. Talking about laying foundations and building bridges. Like, it sounds like you got to be pretty darn handy, not in like the cowboy sense, but handy in that like, oh, this guy can like fix anything. So is that
figure out how to be self-reliant?
Yeah, I'm sure. When you guys are doing all this, because you're talking about a seasonal crew, is your life very seasonal? Like, do you have like quiet winters and then just like crazy hours in the summer and things like that, or how does that work?
Well, I think that used to be the case with more of that seasonal lifestyle, but technology has kind of changed all that and there's been some shift in duties. So, I run the crew from, we start, end of March, early April through around, we start putting on our first shoes on our pack strings about mid-March, and we pull them the first week of December. And then in between those months, we're hiring, doing some project requests. And then also in the winter, I do snow surveys. So since there's no automated snowtail sites to gauges allowed in the wilderness, we go back in the winter, February, March, and April. We ski in, measure the snow at sites that I think were marked in the 40s, and then we report that. And that's the information they use for everything from irrigation districts to running the locks down the Mississippi, and dam control works all the way down. So those trips involve, it's about a 70-mile loop. So in November, I'll pack in, some non-perishable food items and stash them at the cabins, and then we ski in February. And then sometimes, about half the time in March, we can put some shoes on and ride about halfway to those cabins. And then in April, we only have to ski about the last 8 or 10 miles of it as the snows come out.
That's like the most hardcore data collection I've ever heard of in my entire life. Like I have a lot of friends in grad school right now, and they just like seem like the softest people ever now listening to you talk about having to do that to get snow data. That's wild, man.
Yeah, it's great. It's always the highlight of my winter.
Yeah, I bet. That sounds crazy. It's crazy, the concept of like you're packing in November and you're like, well, I'll be back for this in February.
Oh,
that's,
yeah.
That really puts some weight to your job, huh? It's like, well, me 3 months from now doesn't want to get hungry.
Yeah, you got to do a little planning. More of that preparation.
Are you exceptionally organized?
No, not particularly. No.
See, I feel like your whole job's having to be organized.
Yeah. Well, you're not wrong. I mean, you got to be thinking ahead. But no, I'm not a very organized person
Oh,
when
okay.
it comes to that.
Huh.
Yeah.
Well, that's okay. So I went to Virginia Tech, and I my degree is actually in industrial engineering of all things, like systems engineering.
Oh, okay.
And we had a professor who she was an excellent professor, did all this great research and all this stuff. And one of the students made a comment like, "Wow, you're so laid out, and you have like you design these like beautiful like assembly lines and all that stuff. Like I bet you're a really organized person." And she was like, "My house is the most disheveled thing you've ever seen in your entire life. Like I'm only organized in this one little section of my life, and then everything else is I'm just kind of like everybody else."
Sure. Sure. Well, and after a while, there's a rhythm to it, right? I mean, you just
That makes sense.
and that seasonality, you just know what needs to happen next.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Wow.
Uh,
How long have you been with this position that you have now?
I got to this district in 2002.
Okay.
So whatever that
Wow.
21 years.
Wow.
Yeah.
And what were you doing before that? Was there kind of a long break-in period of just learning everything and kind of getting up to speed
Well,
to where, like you said, now you just sort of know what's next?
the when I was a junior in high school, I wandered up to the nearby ranger station. I grew up west of Missoula, and they hired me onto their trail crew um, as a high school student, and then I worked there for 3 seasons while finishing out high school and going to college. I got a range degree from Bozeman, and then in between there, when I was in college, I went up to Glacier Park and took a job up there doing the same thing, um, running some crews, helping packing, and then got landed here in Choda when I finished up with college. So
Wow.
so that's
Are you?
that's been the
Yeah. Are you married?
I am. Yeah, I've shortened my leash in the last decade as well. So that's why I'm in town tonight. Is we have 2 boys and 2 young boys, 5 and 9 years old.
Oh,
Uh,
great.
Wow. So
and I
you
was I
spend
was
some
telling.
time away from home then, huh?
Yep, yep. But the bigger the crew is, the more logistics there is to take care of in the front country. Shuttle and stock. I mean, we just finished shoeing a day ago on our second round, and that was 63 head that we they're reshod, and thankfully it's a contract, but it's just you got to move all that and facilitate all them critters in the same location to get them reshod and then get them back out to the field.
Man.
But I was telling Joe, my wife runs she is half owner of a small outfitting business as well, that works in the woods, and so we kind of alternate through the summer. So she's gone on a trip 1 or 2 weeks a month, and starting in June through October, and so then those are the weeks I make sure that my schedule doesn't conflict with that.
Oh, wow.
But,
Yeah, that's a pretty good.
so I
Yeah.
head in tomorrow, and I work with a really talented fella, um, and he has rebuilt a trail grader. So when they made a lot of these trails in the 30s, when they had the CCC camps, they had McCormick Deere, I think it was. I don't think it was John Deere at that point. Built a trail plow and grader, and he has found the parts and rebuilt it. And what he couldn't find, he made. So we're packing in a grader tomorrow that we're going to redo a few miles of trail this week with it. We got a draft horse that I picked up a couple of years ago that he's been working for just getting ready to do that. So tomorrow we're going to, I guess, break the ice on that, so to speak. We've been planning it for a while. So as
Oh,
opposed
okay.
to we're going to go recontour, rebuild some trail with the draft horse and trail plow and grader.
Wow. So this horse is gonna pull the grader.
Yep.
That's gonna be a job. I don't envy that horse at all.
So
Um,
it's not terribly heavy. It's a couple 100 pounds.
Yeah.
And you can adjust the blade on it for width of trail from 24 inches down to about 18-inch tread.
Okay.
and
That's
then
awesome.
It's got a cutter blade on the inside. Will stick on the inside of the slope and reestablish the trail in
Yeah.
some high use areas.
Huh. That it makes sense, but I would have never known that such a piece of machinery existed, like a horse-drawn grader.
Yeah.
That's pretty cool.
Yeah, for just single track trails, not one like, not doing wagon roads.
Right, right.
No, pretty specialized piece.
Yeah.
But I guess that's exactly what you guys need, right?
Well, in the 20s and 30s, when the Forest Service was ramping up for fire protection in all these remote areas, they had to figure out how they were going to get their firefighters and their gear to all these places. And so they started, with the CCC days, they started building these trails and these routes and cabins and fire lookouts. And so along with that need came the equipment as well.
Yeah. Yeah, makes sense.
Wow. Yeah. I've been around one of those like pull behind scoops, like with two
Fresno.
handles, and it's like a big old shovel. And I've seen one of those in action a few times. But boy, you guys use those ever? That's a dandy piece of equipment. But I imagine, so that takes two guys, right?
Well, or real broke horse if you can hold the lines and run the handles at the same time. But yeah, we have never used one of those Fresnos, Ben. There's a few of them around here in the boneyard.
Okay.
But,
Yeah.
a lot of times they were using those for making dams, it seemed like.
Yeah. I guess you can just kind of pull dirt with those. And I guess those guys must have been really handy with anything behind a horse. Now we're used to having a bobcat, so kind of look at something like that and you're like, I don't know what you'd do besides scoop a little dirt and drag it. But if you could be dropped in time, I imagine you would see some pretty innovative workers. Well, maybe if we just got dropped in on your work camp, we'd see some innovative working. That's what it sounds like.
Yeah, well, I don't know about that. But we did have a small excavator a few years ago that slipped the track, and that track was broken. And it was kind of unique. I packed in a set of tracks to an excavator.
That's cool.
In the backcountry. So it was one of those smaller ones. Each track was maybe about 130 pounds or so, and we have a pretty large mule in the string that she's about 17.2 and probably 1,600 pounds, and so the tracks didn't even look ridiculous on her.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's a monster of a mule.
Yeah. What's the average weight that you can pack on one of your mules?
Usually the 20% rule is about what you figure, so that your 1,000-pound mule is carrying 200 pounds. That includes the saddle, and that's based on a day in and day out, with full rations type of work schedule. So if we try not to go over. Once you get the saddle and pad and everything, you lost about 40 pounds there. So we aim for somewhere in that 75 to 80 pound range for our loads. That's about ideal. You're kind of maxing things out about there. A lot of our mules run from that, 900 to 1,200 pound ranges.
Loads being one on each side, then.
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah. So not 80 pounds total plus the saddle, 80 pounds on either side, and the 40-pound saddle.
Yep.
I'm tracking you.
Yep.
So I guess it was just an inherent question we had to ask. What's the craziest thing you've had to pack in however 3 decades now, almost?
We packed a refrigerator about 15 years ago, a propane refrigerator in to one of our cabins. Okay. That's probably the oddest thing that we did was.
Now, was that on one critter? And
we did. We tried.
How did you orient that?
So we built a little angle iron frame that we could hang on our Decker pack saddle, which is the pack saddles that have the iron hoops over the top. And so that frame hung there, and then we fixed the refrigerator to it, and then we kind of just, like you would with all the loads we do in the Decker style packing, just adjusted it to where it kind of seemed balanced. And then on the other side, we used horse cake pellets, basically, because they're fairly dense and heavy. And we just built up a load of horse cake until we got it to balance. And that fridge rode pretty high up on the mule so that it kind of balanced itself. Part of the weight of the fridge was actually tipped over onto the other side, as far as the physics of it would go.
Sure.
And then, and then readjusted it a handful of times. Took it off once, give the mule a little break, gives the back a break. Had a pretty good sized mule. He was probably about 1,350 pounds. And it was not a giant fridge like you have in your home. I mean, it's one of those smaller ones. It's probably about 5 feet high, and I think it weighed in there around that 140-pound range once we took the doors off.
Gotcha.
So that was a little heavier than that mule, could carry day in and day out. And we made sure to, we gave him some time off afterwards.
Right. That was just, like you said, it's kind of a hard pull, and then you got to give him a break after that. That makes sense.
Yep.
Wow.
But it's not like, a lot of, oh, go ahead, Ben, sorry.
No.
Yeah,
I was
go
just
ahead,
reflecting on what you were talking about. It seems like that could get sketchy. Or like if you went, I don't know, just because is it just a cinch? You've got what, 2 cinches on that saddle or 1 on a pack saddle cinch?
On the Decker saddle that we run, there's just a single cinch. I mean, similar to your riding saddle where it's rigged, and then we can adjust where that rigging goes based on different shape and length of the back of the animal. And then there's a breast collar and a breeching. And we primarily pack mules. They just seem a little more adept at it.
Yeah. So that balance you were talking about must be so important to keeping that load right in the center. Because like the cinch is holding the saddle on, but I mean how balanced your pack is going to really determine whether or not it's going to stay on or not. Is that correct?
That's exactly right. You nailed it. Yep.
Wow.
I always like to equate, packing is 90% horsemanship, and it's 10% putting the same amount of weight on each side, and then putting a slip knot and a half hitch on it.
So, and that kind of leads up to what I was going to ask you, like when you're getting ready to pack out and you've got these people helping you, especially someone that's new, you must be watching them like a hawk. And do you go through and make sure that you do a final check on all the packs, make sure everything's good before you leave, or because it seems like someone might think it's good, but if they don't have a lot of experience, they're like, yeah, we're all good back here, and then theirs starts getting off halfway through the trip, and that kind of holds things up.
Kind of depends on how sporting you feel.
That's a good answer.
And how well you know the person. But yeah, I mean, you need to double check some stuff, especially if somebody else is tying it on and then they're handing that mule to you to tow. I would expect everybody to go and check it, because it's going to be their wreck if something comes apart there. And honestly, when you're going down the trail, you ought to be looking backwards at your mules about half the time or better anyway, because I mean, whether they bump a tree or they gain some slack in a rope, all that stuff happens. It seems like it's the first mile you'll have to adjust stuff, and then some stuff will come up about mile 3 once they get sweated up, and that cinch loosens up, and then for some reason it seems to get about mile 15. Those like if you're counting miles, like those are typically the spots, from my experience, on where you might have something slip on you, but it can happen at any point.
Yeah. This is the low-hanging fruit of this interview, but like I explained to you earlier, we're not terribly polished or anything. You have to have gotten in some kind of hell of a wreck at some point in your career, right? Like something has had to have gone to hell in a handbasket at some point if you're doing things like packing refrigerators and whatnot.
Anybody that tells you they haven't had a wreck is lying.
Yeah.
Either about the wreck or their experience.
Sure.
So yeah, it happens.
Yeah.
And you just, you can come to expect it, and you just got to kind of manage it as it is happening.
Yeah.
And
nothing terribly comedic you'd want to share with the public, would you?
Um, I mean, not terribly. I mean, after a while, there's kind of a recipe to them.
Well, I'd love to know the recipe.
Yeah,
That actually is. Let me ask you this: Are there ever warning signs? Like, because that's like we talk about Tom and Ray, and it's like figure out what happened before what happened happened. Have
right.
Have you kind of been able to progress at that at all in the last 25 years?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I mean,
Yeah.
whether you're constantly trying to hedge your bets
Yeah.
on how those loads are going to ride. The type, everything from the type of knots that you're tying to how those saddles are fitting to which mules you put in line in which order is all based on trying to get from point A to point B with the least amount of interruptions. But then, the recipe typically is, you see something, and whether it's a pack that's listing a little bit or something that's in the trail, whether that's a stick or a log or a hiker or a dog, and you think it'll probably be all right. Um, and or that load will probably make it to that meadow I know of up here. It'll be a nice place to adjust loads, or I'm almost to where I'm going. And it's almost every time that you have that thought that you can just about bet that something is going to happen in between those two spots that's going to end up with a saddle or a load under a mule's belly, or a mule on top of another one. And you just gotta. That's just how it goes. You also try and front load your day enough that you have enough daylight, so when that inevitable happens, that you've got time to sort it out in the daylight, as opposed to in the dark.
Oh yeah, I bet that's just absolutely miserable. Like having to kind of gather your chickens and the sun's going away.
Yep, yep, yep. That's the downside of it. That
Yeah,
if you didn't do your preparation enough to get enough ahead of it, and
yeah,
sometimes you just end up riding in the dark that way. Um,
yeah, yeah. That's interesting. Like you said, that kind of ties back into the self-reliance deal, right? Because all you have to do is kind of deal with the consequences of your actions a handful of times, and it's a heck of an incentive to then be like, okay, well, I'm just not going to act like that anymore. I'm going to try to be proactive about this now and not allow that to happen anymore. But until you've had to kind of eat some crow and have those long nights or whatever it is, you know you don't develop that same self-reliance the same way.
Yeah. Well, I mean, so here's a story. This didn't really result in a wreck, but I mean, it was one of those instances. This was a few years ago. We were hauling lumber in for a subfloor on one of the cabins, and I think I had 6 or 7 mules, and the fellow I was working with had 6 or 7 mules behind me. And we're coming down this draw, and you can see for quite a while, or quite a ways. I mean, maybe a half mile or so. The whole place had burned 20 years prior to that. And I see a sow grizzly with 3 cubs hit the trail in front of me. She'd come down the slope and hit the trail and headed the same way we were. And I turned around and hollered at the guys, like, hey, and pointed out. And I said, and she's got a cub. And then I go around the corner, and he comes out on the point, and he can see her, and he's like, she's got 3 cubs. And then pretty soon we pick up the track, and we're following her down the trail. And this went on for 3 or 4 miles. So we're into it about an hour and a half now. We're just both traveling in the same direction. We're not gaining any ground on her. We can see her once in a while. And then we get down to kind of the floor of the canyon. Hadn't seen her in a while, and the tracks disappeared. And it's still pretty open on the hillsides. And I looked up the hillside and was like, well, maybe she went up there. I don't see her. And look across the creek, and I don't see her. And I kind of shrug and kick the horse, and we hit the canyon floor. We hadn't gone another 100 yards, and I see a little brown fur ball bolt out from inside the creek, maybe 30 yards from us, and it just happened all pretty fast at that point, where she come boiling out of the creek bottom, snapping her teeth and like the froth flying from the mouth, and almost instantly, and she closed that distance. I mean, in less than a heartbeat from 30 yards down to in that, I don't know, hard saying, maybe 15 yards, 10 yards range. and got all her cubs. And so at that point, I think she kind of looked at us and saw that there was, I don't know, whatever we had, 15 head of horses and mules, and 2 guys. And then she glanced over and checked her cubs, and then saw that they were moving away, and that was as close as she came. And then she kind of eyed us for a little bit and started backing off. And that was one of those where, we're following the bear with the cubs down the trail, and it's like, it'll probably be okay. And it ended up being okay, but I looked around behind me. We were on a side hill, and every one of those mules had gone up the side hill and put the mule in front of it between them and the bear. They were just staggered going up the hillside. And by the time I thought to turn around and look, once she had crossed back over the creek, I just see ears sticking out from behind loads, checking out what was going on. And we had about 4 miles left to the cabin that day. And every squirrel and bird tweet and stick that broke, we were everywhere. I mean, like the adrenaline throughout the herd was high. And they burst apart 10 or 15 times over the course of the next 4 or 5 miles.
Define burst apart.
So we always use a weak link between every animal. We use a 1/4-inch piece of hemp rope that we tie one mule to the next mule with. And it's just a little circle of hemp rope that you tie the lead rope in, and it's tied to the back of the saddle of the one ahead of it. And that stuff breaks, if I remember right, around 600 pounds on the tensile strength on it. So that if you had a mule that stumbled and went off the edge of the trail, or something come down between them, they just break apart. They pull back, break apart, and you collect them. It's just a safety feature that we use. And some mules kind of figured out, and you might have to double them up and use 2 of them to incentivize them not to do that constantly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, that makes sense. You'd want to have that in place. Have you ever had one of your mules stomp a bear? Because I know when I was in Colorado, we had a couple of mules we packed with. We weren't doing anything like what you guys do. But whenever we had a bear come around, all the horses get their little antics up, and they go up and like hang out in the barn or hang out together. And those mules would perk their ears up and head right down there, like, let me at them, But they couldn't get at them. There was a fence between them. But you ever have that happen?
Not while I was using them. I'm sure it happened. I don't know what happens at night in the pasture.
Yeah.
But I'm sure they.
But you haven't had an old predator get that close.
I watched an old mule put the run on a grizzly bear a few years ago, just north of town here. I just happened to be going down the highway and saw the bear and pulled over to watch and see what would happen. And there's an old mule that was babysitting some colts, and those colts were all just right in that hip pocket of the mule, and he put the run on that grizzly bear till it ran across the highway.
Wow.
But yeah,
boy, that
you're
would have
exactly
been
right. I mean,
that would have been that would have been like a TikTok right there.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Moose are the bigger problem, honestly. The horses and mules tolerate the bears better than they do moose.
Really?
At least here. I don't know if that's everywhere.
So what's the problem with moose?
I don't know. There's something about whether it's the, just the smell and scent and looking at them that, bigger wrecks happen with moose for us than typically with bears.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's what we were always taught. You saw a moose, kind of back out of there, maybe even get in some trees where they can't fit their rack between. Because from the stories I've heard, boy, a moose charges you in open ground, you are done for.
That's wild.
Yeah. Man.
You mentioned that you felt like mules had a little bit more aptitude for the packing. Can you go into that? Because obviously everyone kind of has the image of a pack mule in their head, or at least I have the image of a pack mule in my head. But you spend a lot of time around mules, and we've had a couple mule people on the podcast. What do you feel like is the big difference for them that kind of makes them suited for that job compared to a horse?
I'd say their self-preservation is a little bit different. I don't know in a lot of mules that the flight mode is as close to the surface as it is in horses. And I'm speaking in generalities here. Mules look at a couple other options as opposed to flight along with it for their defense mechanisms. And sometimes, and I think this is why they get labeled as stubborn, sometimes a mule's self-preservation manifests itself in they just grow roots, and they don't move. Because they're not sure what the outcome's going to be. And they have, I don't know if that's instinctual or learned behavior, that they've figured out that probably the best outcome for them is just not to move. And that's where you see kind of the classic image of somebody trying to pull a mule with a lead rope, and they just say, nah, I don't think this is in my best interest. So that's one, is those mules have that maybe a slightly suppressed flight mode compared to horses in general. They definitely are maybe, I don't want to say thoughtful because that's anthropomorphizing them. And that is something that we see a lot. You guys see it a lot too. As I like to say it, in all anthropomorphizing is wrong, but some is helpful when it comes to trying to explain horse and mule behavior. They quickly learn that the least amount of pressure on them, or the best way to find relief, is to walk from, the hitch rail where we started and put the loads on to the hitch rail where they get taken off without causing much kerfuffle is the easiest or the least path of least resistance for them. Little faster than a lot of horses do. Horses, you can still get to react, or those bigger reactions as maybe a wreck unfolds or a saddle goes under their belly, whereas mules will come quicker to that realization that not moving is their best option. They're really sure-footed. I don't know if I would say that their balance is better than horses, but maybe generally speaking, their foot placement might be when you're talking about mountainous terrain.
Sure.
I remember hearing one time that, again, it's kind of anthropomorphic, but it sounds like what you're saying, that a mule, one of the differences between a mule and a horse is the horse will step in a hole and trip and then come through tomorrow and step in the same hole, and he'll just keep stepping in that hole if it lines up with his foot pattern, where the mule has a little bit more of that ability to remember and think ahead and know where he is and just have a little more presence of mind. So when he comes through the next day, he's like, oh, that's that hole. And he steps over the hole. And, if he ever does trip in a hole, he's not going to trip in it twice.
Hey there, On the Move listener. Do you enjoy listening to this podcast? If you made it this far in the episode, I assume you do. But you never know. I could just be talking to someone's house cat at this point. But if you are there and you like the podcast, the best thing you can do to help support our journey to keep this thing going is to find us on Apple Podcast, on Spotify, leave a rating, leave a review, get on social media, follow us on Instagram, like us on Facebook, subscribe to our YouTube. The more we can grow this, the easier it's going to become for us to put out episodes every week and get awesome guests so we can learn and stay on the move just like you. Thanks.
Yeah, and I think that's a fair statement. The mules are just maybe a little more aware of their surroundings than horses are. Horses might rely on the herd a little more for that. But whenever you go out to the pasture, if you're wrangling or if there's something that steps in the pasture, it is always the mules that notice or pick up on it first. In that same manner, we have 37 mules, 25 horses. I bet you 2/3 to 3/4 of our vet bills are the horses, even though we have more mules.
Now, do you think that's because the mules are less prone to accidents, or the mules are tougher? Because mules are, I mean, at least they seem to be a little tougher than a horse.
I think it goes back to that they're a little bit more aware of their surroundings, or their cognition of of recall of their surroundings is maybe a little better. And then I wouldn't classify them as tougher, but again, that flight mode, it always seems to me like the horses are constantly getting themselves injured because they got scared of something and then ran into something else. Uh, is the mules don't quite have that as close to the surface,
Hmm.
especially the ones that are a little bit seasoned.
Wow. Yeah, you see that with people, like people that work in high risk situations. You get hurt less and have less accidents if you're more aware, more comfortable, less afraid, have good decision making skills, and just think your way through it. Kind of stay calm and cool, collected.
Yeah,
I want.
but
Go ahead. I think we have a little delay, so I'll try to work with that so I don't chop into your talking and no one chops into mine.
oh yeah, well go ahead, Ben.
Well, I just wanted to ask you along those lines because we're talking about having wrecks and just the potentiality of things going south. And you're kind of you're thinking about that every day as you work. And so you're working with these you have new people coming in and you're helping them learn and get up to speed and do their job. Are you the kind of person that likes to leave a little room in there for people to have near accidents happen so that they can learn, or are you pretty ahead of it and you don't really leave any room for that? You tell them it could happen, but you make sure there's no room for an accident the best you can so they don't learn the hard way.
I don't think there's any way around closing all the doors to, or padding the room enough that they don't have accidents. The I try and keep our stock trained, well trained, and quality equipment, and provide all the opportunity for the crew to learn that they have the capacity to take in. But I'm sending them out for 10 days at a time. I don't see them. I talk to them on the radio, maybe 2 times over that 10 days. Just checking in and see where they've been, what they've got done, and what they're planning on doing. Over the course of we call them a hitch, their 10 days in the woods. So there's ample opportunity for them to learn a little bit of that trial by fire.
Yeah, I bet.
But we try to spend as much time as we can in the spring, reviewing and doing some preparation in town in a more controlled environment, and get everybody back on their horse in the arena, and have them walk and trot and lope, and tie some loads on, and get a little bit of a handle and figure some stuff out before we just crank them out to the woods. And and that wasn't always the case. That's something I've come to over years of experience, that we needed to, pull back in and do that in town to help our people succeed, and our stock, really.
Yeah.
I mentioned earlier about not finding applicants that come with the level of experience that we're looking at. I mean, we don't find animals either. As you guys know, I mean, you're looking for a good broke saddle horse that you can go get a job done on, and you can pretty easily pay $10,000 to $12,000 for that animal if it's under 10 years old. And so that's not something that we're going to be able to purchase here. So we're buying young horses, green horses, horses that somebody else had a problem with that we might have to work on for a bit or a season before we can turn them over to our less skilled users. So that same thing it applies with trying to get some stuff done in a controlled environment to better prepare them so that we know we've got that control when we go to the woods.
Yeah, that makes sense. I was just curious, kind of your mindset on that, because obviously trial by fire is inevitable eventually, but it's expensive too, right? And so there is, you get around some people and they have that attitude of like, well, you'll figure it out. You know, you might break a few eggs, but you'll get there. But there's a lot of prevention. And I think we're kind of about to get into talking with you about that. And just obviously, you've listened to our podcast a little bit, and we seem to have connected with you more over the horsemanship realm than the packing realm. And when did that first occur to you that you guys could implement more horsemanship, or was it always in place? I'm not even sure if you were the one that instigated that or not. But obviously, you've kind of got to where, even though using the mules and the horses as transportation is just that, but it's also very important because you're using them every day as your transportation. So, from what it sounds like, you guys have started to implement better horsemanship methods and try to get your people to do those things to prevent these accidents. And so, how did that come about?
Oh, I was always inclined towards the horsemanship aspect. It just took me a while to find the information I was looking for. I ended up in Bozeman at Montana State University, and they had a pretty good equine program there. There was colt starting classes and intermediate and beginning Western equitation, and I took those, and it basically is what helped me get through college was the ability to go out to the arena and lay my hands on a horse and do some riding through the week. And so that really kind of started the path for me down that horsemanship realm. At that point, I'd worked 3 or 4 seasons on a trail crew using horses and mules. And that really opened my eyes on that it was more than just, camping out up there to get to the work site. So that's then got the job here and I got appointed as the stock manager for the district because it's not just my crew that uses them. We've got 3 remote fire lookouts that are supplied by Pack String in the wilderness through the summer here as well that work for the fire program, along with wildlife folks and range technicians, all going to the backcountry using horses and mules. So I managed the stock program for the whole district doing that stuff. But it just took a while to gain some traction on seeing how the horsemanship could really benefit everybody across the board on what we were doing in the woods. And by benefit, not only the horses, but making it a safer work environment by removing a lot of those variables that that a horse and rider or packer and mule come between them. And so there were some folks around here that I had made contact with and started having that guy do a two-day clinic for our horses and riders in the spring. And then most recently, the last 3 years in the fall, I've gone to a Martin Black clinic, and that he has just south of here, about an hour. And then last year we had it was big, made a big enough impression on me that we did an all Forest Service clinic for different packers around Montana, Idaho, and Wyoming that would come and take that week, just improving their horsemanship skills. Because as you guys know, I mean, it applies at every aspect. It doesn't matter what you're doing with them.
Oh yeah,
Yeah, absolutely.
100%.
Yeah, it applies to a lot of these people's lives too, right? They get kind of hungry for it, and then they see that, they like what you're saying. They're like, oh, it's not hard. I think we've talked to people, and at first we'd ask people like, is there any pushback? But more and more you start to see that there isn't a lot of pushback to better horsemanship. You know, there's a little squabbling here and there at times, but there can't be much pushback because it brings such a positive change to almost any environment, and any environment with horses in it, that people kind of soak it up right away.
And what I've seen is, as the horse and mule market gets harder to find usable animals, as I've increased my skill set, there's more animals out there that I can make work in this function. So it used to be, maybe I'd say 50% of the horses would fit our criteria. But as I've got improved, maybe we've upped that to 70%, that we can get and help that horse figure out that this is the job and this is where he can be comfortable, and and make them a success, along with raising the bar for our employees as well.
Could you talk about that selection process for your stock? Like it sounds like a lot of your mules are draft type mules. Do you have draft cross horses? Like, kind of let me know what your line of thinking is when you're looking to add to your horse string and to your mule string, what you're looking for in those animals.
Well, sum it up the same as everybody, right? Straight, sane, and sound. That's where it starts. Is looking for those three criteria, and then seeing what kind of training they had. I'd say, I bet you 90% of our mules were foaled somewhere within 1,000 miles of you guys. There is not much being raised out west for mules. They almost all come from back east, and there's a whole bunch of mule traders that leave here and go back and attend all those mule sales in your guys' country in the winter, and then bring trailer loads of them back out here. Some of them use them, some of them just put them up for sale right away. But that's most of our herd is from back there. Draft mules have become increasingly hard to come by. I'd say most of our mules are some sort of walker, thoroughbred, quarter horse cross.
Okay. The draft mule market. So I want to hear the rest of your answer, but my dad probably 5 or 6 years ago got into the whole draft mule deal, and he has a couple teams of Percheron mules that he pulls his wagons, pulls some sleds, pulls some farm equipment, stuff like that. And when we went to a couple of those sales, the draft mule market kind of blew my mind, where you could have like $7,000 yearlings.
Yeah.
Draft mules.
Team of 3-year-olds for $15,000, $20,000. Yeah.
Yeah, it wasn't a big deal at all. Yeah, it really makes you think about being in the cattle business when mules sell like that. So.
Yeah. Yep.
But anyway, I wanted to make that point, but yeah, talk a little bit more about. So you're looking at like thoroughbred walkers, quarter horse type mules then.
Ideally, it's not as much the breeding as it is, that size. 14.3 to 16 hands, somewhere, 1,000 to 1,200 pounds is real nice. A lot of those medium-sized mules, I think they have better longevity than some of the larger ones, and so that's something that's a plus for us too, just to be able to get a longer usable lifespan out of them. And then we've been buying younger ones too, buying 2-year-olds that get trucked back out here in the winter, and we pick those up and we start them here in the corral, and then and so in that case we're not looking, we're not purchasing based on their training, we're purchasing them based on their potential. So we're looking at size, conformation, like I said, and trying to get that general feel for when you go up to the pen, like how wild is that critter. But what I'm real fond of saying is you don't know what you got till you got it. Like by the time you really understand what you purchased, the warranty is expired.
Yeah.
And you want it.
Yeah. So when you say start, even if they're destined to be a pack mule, do you break them to ride when you start them, or do you just get them broke to the pack saddle and kind of get them good about ponying and stuff?
We just get them started for the pack saddle.
Yeah. That makes sense.
We got a few that we ride or that we'll put the crew on, but I think it's increasingly the odds are against finding a mule that has the right disposition to be a quality saddle animal. Like where I would put it, and I'm sure some folks would disagree with me, but so I'm just basing this on this is my asterisk. My experience,
right,
is.
But to be fair, it's a quarter century of experience by now, so you probably have more experience than most.
60% of, if you took 100 horses, 60 or
Yeah.
70 of them horses are going to be pretty good saddle animals. That you're going to be able to, before that horse is 10 years old, put an intermediate rider on, and they'll be able to, get something done. I would say from a saddle animal standpoint, I mean, there's probably only that same group of 100 critters. You might get 10 mules that have that same type of potential for being that saddle animal.
And would
Yeah.
you say that's the previous handling that they've had? Being as mules, remember all that stuff, or why do you think that is?
That's a great question. I don't know that I could really put my finger on that. I think some of that goes back to their awareness, their where and how their self-preservation works. Like, I don't think, like your example about the horse stepping in the hole and then going and doing it again, makes that horse kind of forgiving, right? So like when we make mistakes in our training, that horse, we can go back and correct those. That doesn't always exist with the mules. Like as you make those mistakes, they've cataloged that, and that creates a situation down the road where you might be setting it up to do it right that time, but they remember when you did it wrong, and they're hesitant, and that hesitation will last their whole life. I mean, a lot of people I know that do ride mules, eventually they'll be like, I rode that mule for 15 years, and then he damn near killed me.
Yeah.
And they had, just because something happened, and we're not. My guess is, like, we're not able to put our finger on what happened, but that mule had some sort of recall based on a previous experience that it tripped that self-preservation in him, whereas in the horse it wouldn't have.
Yeah. Yeah, I was curious your thoughts, because I kind of would agree with you on that, because the couple of mules that I've been around, it's a damn sight easier to lead them than ride them. And I think a lot of it had to do with the handling. They were just real boneheaded and sure of, like when I first, little quick story, I kind of got into this horsemanship around the time that I got around this one mule, and they said he would just pull away from you. You'd be leading him, and unless you were leading him from a saddle horse, he would just walk off, and there was nothing you could do about it. And I was like, no, I can fix that. I've watched some DVDs. I know what to do. So I put a halter on him. I put my rope halter on him, and sure enough, I'm leading him, and I'm like, this is going great. And then his name was John Wayne, and John Wayne just splits right, and sure enough, he just pulls it right out of my hand. I probably skied a little ways, and then he was gone. So I was like, son of a buck. So they had an old round corral with one of those mule poles in the center. So I used that thing. I roped him, used that mule pole, and I got him, breaking his hind over, and pretty soon he wouldn't even hit the end of the rope. I was like, that's great. And I'd only worked with horses up till then. So I was like, this son of a buck's not going to do that again. And as I'm leading him back to his pen, this time he just walks off to the left and just kept going. I couldn't stop him. I mean, it was the funniest thing. And then that's when I remember reading it or hearing it. I think even Ray Hunt said the thing about a mule, the difference between a mule and a horse is the mule is like a horse, just more so. And I still don't fully know what that means, but sometimes horses, you think you got something fixed, but then it'll show its head again. I mean, it's going to show its head. But a lot of times what you've been working on, you have it in there as a little tool so you can get through it. And it was like that mule was like, yeah, I know we worked on that, but I still know how to do this. And all that work you did doesn't mean a damn thing because you're not a wooden post in the ground. He got to the end of that rope and just kept on going. And like old John Wayne, if you were riding a saddle horse, you could pack. We were packing elk out, and so he did great. But I mean, if you were riding him, it was the worst thing on earth. He could just go anywhere he wanted, and there wasn't anything you were going to do about it. And I think he was 15 at that point. So,
they're pretty good at wearing pressure. They
man.
learn that. That's a classic mule option that they have come up with. The two things that I've figured out that help with that. Well, and I've turned that Ray Hunt quote over in my head a lot, and I think what he's getting at is, this is just my guess, is they're just less forgiving. By they're like a horse, only more so, is is you look at, that horse where you can make that mistake. That mule will let you make that mistake, but they're going to remember it. And you really got to live by the rule of halves. So of if you apply pressure to a mule and they don't get it, you need to, or they won't accept it, you got to cut that in half and see if they can accept that. If they don't accept that, you got to cut that pressure in half until you find that point that they'll accept, and then build your way back up. The two things with mules is using that rope halter like a hackamore where you bump as opposed to constant pressure, because the minute you give a mule something to lean against, they're going to go. But if you bump them and get that nose tipping back towards you when you're leading them on the ground, you stand a lot better chance of getting them turned. Because what they really do want you to do is lay into that halter, and they'll get their hip towards you, and then they'll just take you on a ride.
Oh, yeah. Well, and that short neck, they have so much freaking leverage as soon as they get that angle, too.
Yep.
Oh, my gosh.
Yeah, you guys are telling me. I remember. It's like it was yesterday. I was Mr. Horse Trainer, not.
I just recently, I'm this is giving me horror stories because I'm currently restarting a mule for a client.
Okay.
Yeah. And, man, you talk about, like, pulling out the arsenal to to get a change. But the first time I went to ride him, I figured out his go-to move was when you ask for an up transition, figure out where the closest solid wall in the pen is and slam your leg against it. And it only took I was incentivized to figure out how to block that really quick because I wanted to like hold on to my kneecaps. But I've never seen it like it wasn't like I'm gonna kick, I'm gonna buck. He was like, I'm gonna take this shoulder and my right shoulder, I'm going to slam this right shoulder into that wall, and I understand the fact that you are between the wall and my right shoulder.
Yep.
And I've never seen something so deliberate in my entire life from an equine. But yeah, they get all kinds of crazy tricks like that. That just like a horse would never. I mean, I guess you could get a horse to do it. You could do anything, but you'd never think a horse would come up with. And a mule is just like, no, I can handle this. I like wearing pressure is a good way to put it.
Yeah,
they don't mind.
Yeah. And they're very intentional in that. So the self-preservation you're talking about with that mule, like he figured out, it's not. That's where I'm saying like flight mode is what a horse has, right?
Mm-hmm.
Mules have figured out some other options. Yeah. Like he's going to rub you off on the fence. A horse might run into the fence, but it's almost unintentional.
Yeah. Oh no, Yeah. So I got off the wall, got off, put my spurs on, got back on, and then we just kind of played chicken for a little bit. He doesn't run into the wall anymore.
So that worked? You were able to apply enough pressure to the ribs there?
Yeah, well, that and right as he was going, we're going to have to edit this part out, but right as he was going to the wall, I actually bent him to the outside, and he only popped himself in the teeth like 2 or 3 times before he figured out he wasn't going to do that anymore.
Sure.
So, because, he'd like kind of counter bend and throw the shoulder, and I had enough going lateral with him that I could bend him. But he had built up so much momentum that he ran his own head into the wall.
Yeah.
And between that and the spur on the hind end, he quit doing that. Which
I don't know if
that's
I'd
the most
edit that out.
horsemanshipy way you could have accomplished fixing that, but.
Well, I mean, so you set it up so he applied his own pressure. I mean, that's his.
But
the basic principle.
I know, but it's not. Wouldn't it just be a hell of a lot better if he was like 2 years old and got started correctly instead of bashing his head into the wall?
Well, he's got to go through all his options that he worked through, that he's put into his toolkit.
Yeah. Well, okay. While we're sharing mule stories, there's a guy down the road who has this mule story of his neighbor trained draft mules for a while, and he got in this mule that was real barn sour. He's like, yeah, the mule just wants to go back to the barn all the time. And he's like, oh, well, I'll just put him to work and won't have that problem. And sure enough, that mule, they'd get him out there. They were dragging logs with him, and that mule would, anytime they weren't right there on the lines, that mule would tear out and go back to the barn. He knew, and he was like, "I'm gonna fix this problem." And so they were clearing out. I don't know where it was, but it was somewhere that hadn't been logged forever, and it was some like big damn oak trees. And they hooked this mule up this big damn oak tree. And I mean, there was no way that one mule could pull this freaking tree, right? And he was like, "We're going to hook him up here, and we're going to let him sit and think about this." And somehow in his infinite wisdom, he was like, what I'm going to do is let him sit here and think about this, and like hooked up to this tree that's way too big for one mule to pull. I'm going to go back to the house, have lunch, come back, I'll unhook him, let him work for the rest of the day, and we'll see how that goes. So he sits down to have lunch on his front porch there, and all of a sudden this guy hears the biggest damn commotion you've ever heard in your entire life. And he looks out, and that oak tree is sticking about halfway out of his barn. And that mule is sitting inside his barn. And he said we had to cut about 5 pickup loads of firewood before we could get the mule out of the barn. And so I don't know whatever became of that poor animal, but I do know that it is not uncommon for people to underestimate the amount of constitution a mule has to do what a mule wants to do.
They're a great creature. They're amazing.
Yeah.
Yep.
Anyway, that's my mule story. I don't want to ramble on about mules because I know Ben and I have had a couple mule conversations. I have a love-hate relationship with them. I think Ben just doesn't like them at all. So
no, I don't mind them. Yeah. You only have so much room in your life for things, right? So when you've got this thing that's running you into a wall, then
yeah, it does make a well-bred horse a much more tantalizing option.
I think it would be totally different if I was in your shoes, Ian, and I was working and packing and getting heavy loads moved on the back of a 4-legged. I would probably love mules. And I have nothing against mules now. I think Joe and I joke, and it's like, well, I mean, I don't need a mule to ride or to use. But, yeah, if the power went out and gas ran out and we were trying to pack salt blocks out here and build some fence, and mule would be a much welcomed asset to the ranch, 100%.
Yeah, they can be quite humbling, as you guys have said as well.
Yes.
So you mentioned one of the most important things was having good gear. And I'm very uneducated on this, and if I ever got the free time, I'd love to. If I won the lottery tomorrow, one of the things I would do is maybe go out to your part of the world and attend some like packing schools or something like that, just to learn about it, because the idea of packing is very interesting to me, but obviously it's not very common around here, and I got a million other plates I'm trying to spin. But one thing I do know is that there is quite a lot of conversation in the packing community about different types of pack saddles. And I know you mentioned you guys use Decker, which are the ones with the wood, the kind of rounded, and they've got the metal bars on them. Can you talk about why you make that decision and maybe what some alternatives are, and why you go with Decker as opposed to some other options?
Well, tradition is what? Peer pressure from dead people. So that's the primary reason.
That tells me this was a good question to ask, because I can see this is going to be polarizing to the right people.
Yeah. No. The Deckers, they come about. I want to say early 1900s, I believe, in Idaho, by the Decker brothers, and come up with this. They were trying to resupply these mines and needed to wind their way through steep slopes and timber, and that traditional sawbuck style where you have usually hard boxes or soft bags that are suspended from the sawbuck style saddle.
Mm-hmm. And that's kind of like the X you see.
Yep, that, and they're wooden Yep.
Yep.
And then they put a top pack and a tarp over them. That they were just wider. And once they got everything lashed on and their diamond hitch thrown, they were attached enough to the critter that the packs wouldn't move. They're almost integrated into the animal themselves. So those guys come up with this idea where they slung these with the use of what's called a basket hitch, these loads off the sides, and when they would go between trees that were too narrow, that load would just brush out of the way, and then once the mule fit through or horse fit through the tree, that load would fall back in place. And I think that was the first thought on why they went to this different style of packing. And since that was in Idaho, it's kind of regional. I mean, if you were to talk to the Forest Service packers in the Sierras, they're all still using sawbuck saddles.
Okay.
Where up here in Montana and Idaho, it's all the Decker pack saddle. I find them to be real versatile because you can pack a variety of lengths on them. And I'm sure those guys, I just lack the exposure to it, have figured out ways to do it as well. It's pretty easy to hang, anything from 8-foot lumber to, the bags of concrete to bridge decking, and specifically just that different shapes and sizes seems to be real adept at going on the side of a Decker pack saddle.
So do the loads sit lower on the Decker or higher? Because
ideally, they're suspended off the back of the animal so that they're sitting kind of like that weight would on your riding saddle, where it's off the bars of the tree, right? And it's suspended on the back. You don't want it on their sides pushing on their ribs, especially if you're, on a hot day or you're going a lot of miles. That's where, you get them big white marks down the sides, or it just adds to the fatigue of the animal as well. So ideally, they're kind of suspended up there on the sides, and underneath the tree on the saddles is a pack board, and it's usually a 2-inch by about a 2-foot slat that's suspended in the what you guys would think of as the skirt, just underneath the tree on the outside, and that helps add some rigidity to displace that weight through the length of the animal as well.
Okay,
but that's all we use. That's what we have, and so the traditional way to do that is you take a canvas tarp, you wrap up your load, you do a series of half hitches down the load, tie that off, and then that's your manied load. And then you put one of those on each side.
Okay. Yep. That tracks. That's interesting that it's regional though, because I hadn't heard that before.
Yeah, it's that's just how it come up and kind of how it still is. I think once in a while you'll see a little crossover. We see some sawbuck packers, come through our wilderness occasionally, and I'm sure the same goes down there.
Is there a banter to it, kind of like dallying and tying off and slick horn and rubber and all that sort of deal?
Yeah. You can have the same, Ford Chevy debate over sawbucks and Deckers. Absolutely. Yeah.
Gotcha. Cool.
Yep.
Yeah, we wouldn't be human without a little bit of division. Ian, do you have any of your own horses that you're doing something with outside of using the packing and using mules in the Forest Service?
My wife and I have 9 head of horses and mules, and she uses them, quite a few of them that aren't colts waiting to get going in her business. And then my brother manages about a 1,200 head cow-calf operation nearby. So every chance I get to toss twine at cows, that's every guy that rides around the mountain wants to ride fast and rope stuff, and everybody that is out here cowboying on the prairie wants to ride around in the mountains.
Yeah. That's pretty funny, huh? Grass is always greener.
Yeah.
How often do you get to go do that?
Oh, I help with their brandings in the spring, and then and then a little bit in gathering in the fall, and then other than that, the other time with my own is just to go hunting.
Yeah.
Oh, great.
You got any other hobbies besides that? I mean, it sounds like you've got a pretty busy schedule, and I mean, even if it's not busy, you're out and about.
Yeah. Do you ski outside of work?
With the family, there's a little ski area west of
Yeah.
town here. Um,
Cool.
that I also for my work life do a little bit with it in the winter as well.
Yeah.
I mean, it's kind of a mom and pop size ski area, one lift,
Gotcha.
so great
Um,
opportunity for the family.
yeah, that's great. That's awesome. So was your wife in this line of work, and that's how y'all met? Like, because that's another thing, right? If you've been doing this, it doesn't seem like there's a lot of potential mates running around in the wilderness. So so how'd you line that one out to not only find a gal, but if she's got her own outfitter business, someone with so many shared interests.
She came to work for the Forest Service about the same time I did here in Shoto, and that's where we met. And then as life happens, we ended up getting married and starting a family. And she'd bounced around for a few different outdoor jobs, from everything from river guide to river ranger to um, working, doing some uh, biological science stuff for with the black-footed ferret to the whole kind of hosted like making ends meet type jobs until the opportunity to purchase an outfit for her and her friend come up.
Yeah. So is that one of the things, owning your own outfit, is that one of the things that's kind of in this industry, that's how you build equity? Or how does that work? Because we had a great conversation with Nick Dowers about that on our last podcast. I don't know if you've listened to that one or not, but he was talking about training horses for other people and riding outside horses, and kind of in the beginning it's like a kind of making ends meet deal, and then you get to the point where maybe you finally get to own a piece of it, or there's ways you can kind of incorporate things. So is that at least one of the formulas in the, I guess you'd say, like the outdoor jobs world or the backcountry world, that you can do it? Or how does that go?
Yeah, I mean, it outside of the government angle, which is the one I ended up in. That's the way to make a living in the backcountry,
Mhm.
is to run some sort of commercial operation. And they, her and her partner, business partner, do a great job at it. I have little or no input into their business. I occasionally tack a shoe back on um, when when they need one on the weekends or in the evenings, um, or shuttle a vehicle. But yeah, they bought a small permit and they've taken some opportunities to expand it. Um, they've done a great job. Their niche is hiking with stock supported hiking trips, basically. So their clients don't ride. Their clients are usually former backpackers that no longer want to strap on a 50-pound pack and have the means to pay somebody else to carry their stuff, and so they bring along a string of 8 or 9 horses and mules with camp and food and wine and anything else that they want for anywhere from 5 to 7 day trips through the wilderness.
Oh wow, that seems like almost ideal, right? Because you take away the need for having basically dude horses or dude mounts. You
Yeah.
know, yeah, that's great. That's awesome.
Yeah. Yeah, that's the
Yep.
ticket, man. Are there any challenges that you all are facing right now in your industry with what you do for the government? Be it wildfires or I don't know, some new conservation laws or the lack of them, or just anything you've got going on right now that seems like a challenge to your way of life?
Um, Probably the two biggest things. Most of my career is spent, as wildfires have been on the increase. Most of this 1,000 miles of trail, probably 600 or 700 miles of it, has had fire go over it in the last 40 years again. After about a 100-year break. So a lot of my work has just been trying to maintain that system or network of trails by clearing that deadfall, because we'll get 6 or 10 days a year where our gusts top 100 miles an hour coming off the Front Range. And so after a fire and you get them wind gusts like that, it lays down a lot of timber. And so we cut a lot of thousands and thousands of trees off the trail every year. The next big challenge for the people, that is on the horizon for Montana, and I think this has happened in Colorado and the Sierras, is trying to manage the amount of use that these pretty unique wild areas are attracting. Where how much use is too much. Trying to figure out that balance, and where you can have that opportunity for solitude and that unique wilderness character, while at the same time not limiting it to everybody who wants to go do it. Like, that's probably the biggest challenge I'd see on the horizon. It's a good question, Ben.
Yeah,
and I don't have any answers.
Yeah. Well, I guess in a way, part of your job is you're trying to save that area and manage the use and manage the land, keep the fires in their proper place and all that, so people can use it for generations. Shoot, we just had the 4th of July. This year, I think more than any year, something about, well, we watched The Patriot, but something about this year, it made me very proud to be an American, and it made me super thankful for the people that came before us. And just thinking about, one thing I did think about leading up to this interview is I was thinking about those parks out there and that land, and that it's our land, it's our public land, and it's phenomenal that we have that resource. So it's great that there's people like you out there trying to make that judgment call, or like at least trying to preserve it. And you probably feel like you're protecting it from people at times, or you can probably be a little dismayed at the amount of people that come out there at times. But in a way, you're doing that for the people in the future to come that will get to experience that, God's country. It's because it's beautiful out there, and there's a lot of people, they don't even realize how beautiful the land is. And it's quite amazing that you guys are out there taking care of that land, because it'd be a shame for anything to happen to it.
You're spot on. I couldn't agree more about the foresight of the forefathers of this country to come up with a public land system that nobody had ever thought of before. Before that started happening, just the amount of shared wealth that resource provides all the citizens is a real tribute to the foundation of the country. It's and along with the ability to use it, I want people to be able to sit on a horse or a mule and experience these landscapes as well. And so that's one thing that, kind of back to where we talked about, that skill set seems to be increasingly hard to come by, of the, that stockmanship level to use animals in these varied conditions. And by that is specifically like camping with them. So we try to spend a lot of time talking to our publics when we encounter them on what is commonly referred to as leave no trace methods, where it's like, how do you minimize your impact with these 1,200-pound animals standing on steel as they go around these wildlands, specifically in your campsite, where they might stay grazing or tied up for a couple days at a time. So because there's not, and this won't be a surprise to you guys, not every user group is real tolerant of those impacts that can be left behind.
Could you give us a little more of an example of that? So like what, I guess what parties are doing that?
Well, if you have So if you have just some recreational stock users, and by that just some folks that they got busy schedules and they might find opportunity to go on 1 or 2 trips a year with the horses. So the horses might not be super experienced or getting ridden a lot, but they take them out to the woods and they're on the vacation. So, and they haven't ever had that mentor to show them how to keep an animal in a camp by minimizing impacts. By that is, so they tie them to a tree, and maybe that tree gets girthed by the lead rope, or the horse impacts the roots enough that, if it's a dry year and there's some drought stress, that could be it for tipping that tree over the point where it just dies there. And you might have a nice campsite next to the river that now you've got a bunch of girthed trees that are dying, or they're dug out around the roots, and there's a bunch of horse manure around it. So if you have a non-stock using party come into that, they're going to look at that campsite and say, this is not acceptable for my public land, right? Because it's that shared resource. So it's one thing I want to try and do and talk with my crews about is, when we get the opportunity to talk to the public, is on how to minimize those impacts with their stock, so that we don't end up with a user group that is writing their representatives saying, like, we got to eliminate these large animals from the backcountry. And I don't know if that's happened in other places or not. I suspect the use dictates that in numbers of people. But some of the things that you can mitigate that pretty easily with is, and you guys know this, is just making sure that your horses are getting taken care of in camp like they were at home. So what everybody's afraid of is riding 4 or 5 hours into the backcountry, and then they turn old Dobbins out to graze and he runs back to the trailer. And then they're sitting there with their camp gear and foot. The best way to try and get those horses conditioned to stay there is make sure they have everything they need. And by that is choosing a campsite that's got plenty of good grass, that you're offering them water, and they're getting the opportunity to graze and drink. And then a lot of times, that's the first time those horses may have sweated up in a while. They're going to need salt, or they might risk that cramping up or just being generally uncomfortable. And I don't think that gets on a lot of people's packing list, is just a chunk of salt. We take a split and maul and knock apart a block of trace mineral, and everybody takes a 4-pound block and drops it in a bread stack and throws it in their loads. And using an electric fence, and then making that electric fence big enough for the number of stock that you have, and then moving that electric fence pretty regularly so your critters can have fresh graze, and then giving them the opportunity for a few hours in the morning and at night. And then once you start creating that routine for them, if you choose to high line them at night, and by high line, it's basically, you stretch a rope between a couple of trees and then tie them in a spot where they can't impact the tree or the roots. They'll stand quiet all night once they know what to expect. If that's like, all right, as soon as that sun starts poking up, I'm going to get back out there and graze. It's creating that expectation. And then you can have pretty light impact with a pretty large stock party.
Yeah, makes sense. All right, people, take care of the land out there. Ian, we better go ahead and start wrapping this thing up.
You bet.
If any of our listeners would like to come out there and work for you guys, or at least apply for that process, where would you like to send them?
It's to start looking on the internet at usajobs.gov. We'll have the Forest Service jobs advertised, usually starting around the end of September, early October. Or if folks, I usually put together an email list and send it out to interested applicants. And my email is ian.bardwell@usda.gov.
All
There
right.
you go.
I think I know a couple people right now that might hit you up that are, like you said, guys who are riding around with cattle that want to go ride around up in the mountains. So
Yeah,
we'll see y'all.
absolutely.
We'll let them know.
It's been a pleasure, fellas.
Yeah.
Thank
Thanks
you for your
again, man.
time. All right. Bye, everyone.